What's going on, everyone? Mr. Octagonal here. Now, today we have a start of a new series, which I am very excited for. It is called 3 Minutes on the Clock. It is a sports podcast where we mainly talk about the NFL and NBA drafts, but we may talk about other sports as well. So as you can see, today we are doing an NFL mock draft. The reason why I came up with the title is because, obviously, when you have a draft, teams are on the clock for a certain amount of time, and we have 3 minutes to talk about each pick. We don't have more than that, which shouldn't be an issue, but I needed to think of something clever, so there we go. Let's get right into it. First pick in the 2019 NFL Draft, the Arizona Cardinals select Quinnen Williams, defensive tackle out of Alabama. Obviously, the popular pick right now is Nick Bosa, but I'm going with Quinnen Williams. I like to be different. I like to change things up, and that's what we're doing. I think Bosa or Williams would make sense here. I think they're two really strong prospects. But I am picking Quinnen Williams. I think he's more athletic than Nick Bosa. I think he has a higher ceiling than Bosa. I think Bosa has a better floor and is a lower risk prospect. But I think Quinnen Williams has a chance to be something really special. Looking at the Cardinals' defensive line, it's not really good. Their only somewhat talented player is Chandler Jones, who is an edge rusher. Nick Bosa is an edge rusher. Quinnen Williams is more of an inside presence. And while Bosa would be a really good complement to Chandler Jones, I feel like they could use that run stuffer, that guy that takes up blocks like Quinnen Williams does. He's a better pass rusher than Ed Oliver. I think they're both very similar in talent, and I think they both have potential to be as good as Aaron Donald, which says a lot because Aaron Donald is the most dominant player in the NFL. Honestly, I think the Cardinals should trade down to pick 3 or 4. I think they could still get Williams or Ed Oliver, and they could obviously get some really nice future assets. But if they stay at 1, I think Quinnen Williams could be a really good pick. The second overall pick in the 2019 NFL Draft, the San Francisco 49ers select Nick Bosa, defensive end from The Ohio State University. In most draft classes, I think Nick Bosa would be the surefire number 1 overall pick. I think he has very similar talent to his brother, and if you have the number 1 pick and you know you're getting someone as talented as Joey Bosa, I say 8.5 times out of 10, you take that pick, you take that player. But I think with guys like Quinnen Williams and maybe Ed Oliver, I think there's a chance that Bosa doesn't go number 1 overall. Now, if I'm the Niners here, I would consider picking Jonah Williams. I think Jonah Williams fits more of a need, but Bosa is extremely talented, and it's going to be hard for the Niners to pass this pick up. Obviously, the Niners have invested a lot in their defensive line as they picked their first-round pick in 2015, 16, and 17, all being defensive linemen: Eric Armstead, DeForest Buckner, and Solomon Thomas. Armstead and Thomas have been meh players. They don't look like busts, but they don't look great. DeForest Buckner, however, that looks like a home run pick. DeForest Buckner is extremely underrated, and he is one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL. So Buckner is really good, but the other two, they're okay. Solomon Thomas hasn't really impressed, and Eric Armstead, I believe, is probably going to be a free agent after next year. And I think Bosa could start day 1 over one of those guys, especially if they have a bad camp. So I think this is a solid pick for the 49ers. I think they have bigger needs, but they are getting a really good football player. Third pick in the 2019 NFL Draft, the New York Jets select Jonah Williams, offensive tackle, Alabama. So the second player with the last name Williams out of Alabama is drafted. He goes to the New York Jets, and I really like this pick. I think Williams is the best offensive lineman in this draft class by a decent margin, and I think this is a good pick for the Jets. Their offensive line is pretty bad, and they need to get themselves their left tackle for their franchise quarterback, Sam Darnold. Darnold showed a lot of flashes as a rookie, but he was far from outstanding. And if they want to get him better, they're going to need to put good pieces around him. He has a below-average receiving core, a below-average running back core, and a pretty bad offensive line. So the Jets, they don't have a lot of skill position players or really talent on their offensive side of the ball for Sam Darnold, and I think this pick does just that. It gives them a franchise left tackle, which I think is going to be huge for Sam Darnold and this offense. With the fourth pick in the 2019 NFL Draft, I have the Oakland Raiders selecting Ed Oliver, defensive tackle from Houston. Oliver was pretty much the consensus number 1 overall player in this draft class during the preseason, and while his stock did fall off, it didn't fall off too much. it seems like I've seen him go between that maybe 7 and 13 pick range. But I have him going number 4 here. I think Ed Oliver's going to have an outstanding combine because he is such a good athlete. I am extremely high on Ed Oliver. I've really liked him since the preseason. And while he wasn't fantastic by any means during this season for Houston, I still think he has so much upside, so much potential, and I think this is a really nice pick for the Raiders. While they have some good players at defensive tackle, P.J. Hall and Maurice Hurst were both rookies last year, and they were both really solid. Obviously, Maurice Hurst has a red flag of health concerns, and I think one of these guys could always move to defensive end, and I think this could be a really nice defensive line for John Gruden, Mike Mayock, and the Oakland Raiders. With the 5th pick in the 2019 NFL Draft, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers select Quinnen Williams, cornerback, LSU. The Bucs are in a really interesting position as they have Jameis Winston. They don't really know if he's the guy, and from what I hear, they do believe in him, and they are still committed to building their team around him. So, assuming they don't pick a quarterback here, what do? The Bucs have some really decent young pieces in their secondary. Justin Evans, Vernon Hargreaves, MJ Stewart, Carlton Davis. None of those guys are surefire players, but they all have upside, and they all have potential. But Quinnen Williams is so good. He is elite size, he's 6'2", and he had a really productive season this year at LSU. You don't find corners too often who are this big, but yet this good, and this overall really solid football player. I think MJ Stewart could transition well to strong safety, and then if the Bucs get Quinnen Williams, then they have a really young secondary that they could build around for their future. The Bucs have some talent on their defense: Gerald McCoy, Vita Vea, Quan Alexander, Levante David in their front 7, and if they add a player like Quinnen Williams, I think this could be a really solid defense. With the 6th pick in the 2019 NFL Draft, I have the New York Giants selecting Clelin Ferrell, edge rusher from Clemson. I know many people are screaming right now that this pick should be Dwayne Haskins, but I feel like the Giants believe that Eli is still good enough, or maybe they'll sign someone in free agency like a Nick Foles or a Teddy Bridgewater, where they don't need to go after Haskins and they can go out and get other positions. I think edge rusher is somewhat a position of need. Olivier Vernon ain't getting any younger, and I think Clelin Ferrell makes a lot of pick here. He's had a really good, productive career at Clemson. He can get to the quarterback, he can make plays, and I think he's a pretty solid fit for the New York Giants at that defensive end or potentially outside linebacker spot. I think he's someone who doesn't have as much upside as someone like a Jachai Polite, but I think Jachai Polite has a much lower floor, and I think Clelin Ferrell is going to be a really good player. I just don't know if he's going to be a superstar. With the 7th pick, the Jacksonville Jaguars select Dwayne Haskins, quarterback, Ohio State. So the first quarterback is off the board, that is Dwayne Haskins. He is going to the Jaguars. There is no doubt that the Jaguars are getting a new quarterback. Obviously, they benched Blake Bortles, and I think it's safe to say the Blake Bortles era in Jacksonville is over. They could always go after a veteran in free agency, but I think it's very likely that they do draft a quarterback here in this year's draft, and that very well could be Dwayne Haskins. I think Haskins is a very underrated prospect. I don't think he gets as much credit as he deserves. He has a really good arm, and he's really accurate. He's a jack-of-all-trades quarterback. He gives you everything you need, and I think he could contribute at a high level early on, and I think this is a phenomenal home run selection for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think Haskins can be this team's long-term quarterback, and I think the Jaguars, if they get Haskins, they should be really excited. The 8th pick, the Detroit Lions select Rashan Gary, defensive lineman out of Michigan. As you may or may not know, I am a huge Detroit Lions fan, and I think our biggest need is absolutely a defensive player. Matt Patricia is a defensive coach, so it only makes sense. I think Rashan Gary fits what Matt Patricia is looking for. Gary is very versatile. He can play defensive tackle, he can play defensive end, and he's that hybrid type of player that fits Matt Patricia's defense. Gary did not quite have the year that people were expecting to have at Michigan. That's because he drew a lot of double teams, and opposing teams knew that this was the scariest player on the Michigan defense. I think this is a solid pick for Detroit. I'm not going to say it's a home run, but if they do get Rashan Gary, I would be pretty happy about it. I think he fits a need. We need defensive line. I do not expect Ezekiel Ansah to be back next year, and the defensive line has a really bright future. Gary, Snacks Harrison, Deshaun Hand, and you have some other solid rotational players like Ricky Jean-Francois, Ashawn Robinson, and Romeo Okwara. With the 9th pick, the Buffalo Bills select DK Metcalf, wide receiver, Ole Miss. Metcalf is an extremely interesting prospect. I think this is a boom or bust pick for Buffalo. He could be a disaster or he could be a superstar, which is, I think, what the Bills need. Like the Jets, I think it makes a lot of sense for him to go offense. I am extremely high on Josh Allen. I really like him. I think he has a lot of upside, and I think the Bills should have redshirted him this year like the Chiefs did with Patrick Mahomes. I think those two are very similar. I just think that Allen might not have the confidence next year since he was not a great passer, and I think DJ Metcalf could certainly help him. Metcalf does have an injury history at Ole Miss, but he's a big-bodied receiver, and I think he would complement Zay Jones very nicely for Buffalo. Obviously, they do need help at other spots. LaShawn McCoy, he's not sticking around much longer. Offensive line is in need, but I think they're going to get Josh Allen, a big-bodied receiver, in DK Metcalf, and I think this is a really solid selection. The 10th pick, the Denver Broncos select Devin White, inside linebacker out of LSU. Obviously, quarterback is a need for the Denver Broncos, as Case Keenum was not really good at all last year. They could go with a Drew Lock, they could go with a Daniel Jones, but I think we're going to go with Devin White. Inside linebacker is a need, as Todd Davis and Brandon Marshall really aren't cutting it anymore, and I think talent-wise, this is a home run selection for the Broncos. Devin White is very athletic, he has a lot of production at LSU, good tackler, really good football player, and I don't think the Broncos could go wrong if they make this selection. The 11th pick, the Cincinnati Bengals select Greg Little, offensive tackle, Ole Miss. The Bengals understand that offensive line is a huge weakness, as last year they traded down to acquire Cody Glenn from the Buffalo Bills, and they drafted Billy Price, 2 offensive linemen. Price is a solid player in the interior of the offensive line. He can play guard and center, but Cody Glenn at that left tackle spot, really, he's not the same player that he once was in Buffalo, so I think the Bengals certainly need to tackle. The Cedric Ogbuehi pick didn't work out. The Jake Fisher pick didn't work out in that 2015 draft, but I think this one will, as they get Greg Little. He has a really nice skill set. He's a big guy. He's pretty athletic. The only thing he really needs to work on is his consistency, and other than that, I think he is super talented, and I think this would be a really nice pick for the Cincinnati Bengals offensive line, which is in desperate need of help. The 12th pick, the Green Bay Packers select Josh Allen, edge rusher from Kentucky. I would love to see Josh Allen go to the Bills, because then they'd have 2 players with the name Josh Allen, but as I mentioned earlier, I expect the Bills to go offense, so I have the Green Bay Packers picking him. I know I've seen him go a lot higher in mock drafts, and I would be a little bit surprised if he still is on the board, but I think this is a really nice pick value-wise for the Green Bay Packers. It fits a need, as Clay Matthews and Nick Perry probably aren't going to be back next year, and even if they are, they're really not that special at those outside linebacker spots. Allen is very versatile. He can play defensive end, outside linebacker. He can even play middle linebacker, which is sort of what I viewed him as last year during the draft process. Of course, he did decide to go back to Kentucky, which I think was the right move. Instead of being a late first, early second round pick, he's going to be an early to mid first. He had a phenomenal year at Kentucky. He won SEC Defensive Player of the Year and was one of the main reasons why the Kentucky football program had their best season perhaps ever. The 13th pick, the Miami Dolphins select Drew Lock, quarterback, Missouri. Drew Lock very well could go pick 10 to the Broncos, but I think, as I mentioned earlier, Devin White's on the board. I think you have to pick him if you're Denver because he's so good. But then the Dolphins are here. The Dolphins are in a really interesting spot. They did fire Adam Gase, who is probably the main reason why Tannehill is still starting there. And I expect the Dolphins to get a new quarterback this offseason and at least compete with Ryan Tannehill for the starting job. Tannehill is still a below average, but yet starting caliber quarterback. I think he's one of the best 32 quarterbacks in the NFL, but he's not the guy who can lead you to the Super Bowl. Drew Lock, while he was extremely inconsistent at times in Missouri, he showed a lot of flashes, and I think he can be a really solid player in the NFL. It's obviously not easy playing against SEC defenses, as SEC is by far the best conference in college football and certainly the most talented. And while Drew Lock did have his fair share of struggles, he also had a lot of great moments for Missouri, and I think this could be a pretty good pick for the Dolphins. The 14th pick, the Atlanta Falcons select Derrick Brown, defensive tackle, Auburn. This is a very popular pick in mock drafts, and I 100% agree with it. The Falcons need a defensive tackle. They may or may not bring back Grady Jarrett, and even if they do, they need another guy next to him, and I think this is a really nice pick. Derrick Brown reminds me a lot of Dontari Poe. They're both gigantic humans, and they're both extremely athletic for their size. Dontari Poe doesn't necessarily fill up the stat sheet, but he gets blockers on him, which opens up more room for the pass rushers, and the Falcons have some very talented young pass rushers in guys like Vic Beasley and Tack McKinley, and I think Derrick Brown can do that plus more. He's really good on run defense, and I think the Falcons have an extremely talented young core of players on defense. If they can stay healthy, then that's a really nice core. And I think the Falcons made the right move by not firing Dan Quinn. I'm really high on Coach Quinn, and I think the Falcons have a lot of talent on both sides of the ball, and I expect them to return to the playoffs next year. With the 15th pick, the Washington Redskins select Daniel Jones, quarterback, Duke. The Redskins had so many injuries this year, and if there was no such thing as injuries, I think it's safe to say the Redskins would have won the NFC East. And Alex Smith's injury was probably the most serious. It's also the main reason why they didn't win the division or make the playoffs, but Alex Smith may never play in the NFL again, and the Redskins all of a sudden now need a quarterback. The best one on the board is Daniel Jones out of Duke. Jones has sort of been an under-the-radar prospect the past year or so, but as of lately, he has sort of climbed up to that first-round mold. He's a big guy. He has a quarterback frame. He was phenomenal in the bowl game against Temple. Temple had the lead for a decent chunk of the first half, and then Daniel Jones just went off on their defense. I wasn't sold on Daniel Jones. Now it's safe to say I kind of am sold on him. I think he has a lot of upside, and I think this could be a really good pick for the Washington Redskins, as Daniel Jones could be their franchise quarterback. 16th pick, the Carolina Panthers select Brian Burns, edge rusher, Florida State. I think this is solid value for Carolina. I don't think Burns is going to be a top 10 pick or anything, but I do think this is about the area where he should go. The Panthers need an edge rusher, as they're very old at that position. Mario Addison, he's a meh player at best, and he's like 32 by now. And then Julius Peppers, while he's still somewhat productive, he might retire. I don't know if he's staying next year. And even if he doesn't, he's like 65 years old anyway. So the Panthers need a young guy at that edge rusher spot, and I think Brian Burns might be the best one available. I think he has a lot of upside. I think he had a solid career at Florida State, and I think this is a huge need for Carolina, and I think they will address that by picking a really solid player in Burns. With the 17th pick, the Cleveland Browns select Jeffery Simmons, defensive tackle out of Mississippi State. I was very tempted to mock a receiver here, maybe N'Keal Harry, but I'm going to go with Simmons with this pick. I think this is a very nice pick for Cleveland. Simmons has top 10, top 12 potential in this draft. He does have some off-the-field stuff, but I think he's such a good football player. The Browns need another defensive tackle along Larry Ogunjobi, who's been really good so far as a pro. And the Browns have a really nice future at the defensive line. Obviously, Myles Garrett looks like a superstar. Jeffrey Simmons, Larry Ogunjobi, and maybe Emmanuel Ogbah if you think he's your guy at left end. I think the Browns defense has a lot of young potential, and I think Jeffrey Simmons could be one of the main pieces of a really good Cleveland defense. The 18th pick, the Minnesota Vikings select Jawaan Taylor, offensive tackle, Florida. The Vikings really need an offensive lineman, as their offensive line is one of the worst in the league. And if you gave them, let's say, maybe Dallas' offensive line in 2016, I think they would for sure be in the playoffs right now, maybe even winning the NFC North. Maybe that's a little bit of a stretch, but they obviously need a lot of help there, and I think Jawaan Taylor can certainly do that. I think Taylor has a low floor but a high upside. I think he's very athletic, very agile. He's raw, but he's probably going to have to start day one because their tackles are Brian O'Neill and Riley Reiff. While O'Neill is a solid young prospect pick in the second round last year, Riley Reiff is terrible, and Jawaan Taylor is probably better than Riley Reiff right now, which says something because, as I said earlier, Taylor is extremely raw in my opinion. I think as a rookie, it might not be smooth sailing for Jawaan Taylor, but I really like his upside, and I think this is a very solid pick for the Minnesota Vikings if they develop him correctly. The 19th pick, the Tennessee Titans select Deionte Thompson, safety, Alabama. I know many Titans fans probably questioned this pick. They need a lot of help on the edge, and getting an edge rusher alongside Harold Landry, who's also a really good young player, I think could be very beneficial for the Titans. But I think someone with Deionte Thompson's talent and caliber, I think it's hard to pass that up. It's not like the Titans don't need a safety. While they have Kevin Byard, who's a really good young player, their other safety is Kenny Vaccaro, who's a good player and all, but he's going to be a free agent this year, and I don't know if the Titans are going to bring him back or not. Thompson can play either safety position, so probably strong safety since Kevin Byard is more of a 3 safety. I would say Thompson's a little bit better at 3 safety, but I think strong safety works as well for him. And I think value-wise, this is a steal for the Tennessee Titans. Obviously, they do have bigger needs, but the value speaks. With the 20th pick, the Pittsburgh Steelers select DeAndre Baker, cornerback, Georgia. I think this is a very interesting pick, as Baker has a lot of skill set, but he's not the biggest. He's only 5'11", 180. He's not the most athletic. He's not the fastest, but he is a really talented cornerback. He won the Jim Thorpe Award, which is the award for the best defensive back in college football, and the Steelers have a need at cornerback. Obviously, Artie Burns did not have a good year at all. He got Artie burnt, if you know what I'm saying. But the Steelers really need a corner. I think Byron Murphy is the best cornerback available, but I think DeAndre Baker is a really solid pick, and if the Steelers picked him, I wouldn't be too sad if I was a Pittsburgh fan. With the 21st pick, the Philadelphia Eagles select Cody Ford, offensive tackle, Oklahoma. The Eagles have some really good players on their offensive line, especially on the right side. Jason Kelce at center, Brandon Brooks at right guard, Lane Johnson at right tackle. Those three are three of the best at their position. But the left side, it's a different story. At left tackle, you got Jason Peters, who's a really good player, but that guy always gets hurt, mainly because he's so old, and I don't think Jason Peters is going to be back in Philly next year. I expect him to retire, and while he was really good for a long time for the Eagles, I think it's time to hang him up for him. I expect Ford to start very early on at left tackle or left guard. He had a lot of production this year at Oklahoma. He had a really good year for the Sooners. He's very athletic for his size, and I think this is a nice pick for Philly. The 22nd pick, the Indianapolis Colts select N'Keal Harry, wide receiver, Arizona State. While it looked like the Colts were in no man's land at this point last year, now looking at them this year, they're in the playoffs, and they are in a super bright direction. They had a phenomenal draft class. Andrew Luck looks like he can probably be a quarterback for them for the next 12 years. Maybe 12 is a little bit over-exaggerated, but the Colts have a really bright future. Why not get him another really nice receiver to pair up with T.Y. Hilton and N'Keal Harry? Harry is your prototypical number one receiver. He has good hands. He needs to work on his route running, but route running is very teachable. N'Keal Harry is probably my number one receiver in this draft class, and I think this is a really nice pick for Indianapolis, as T.Y. Hilton isn't getting any younger, and N'Keal Harry could be a really good player for Indianapolis. With the 23rd pick, the Seattle Seahawks select Jachai Polite, edge rusher out of Florida. I've seen Polite go much higher in mock drafts, and I think this is a really good value pick for Seattle. While they do have bigger needs, they probably could use another receiver. They absolutely need offensive line, but I feel like Russell Wilson is so talented that he can definitely make do with what he has. So why not focus on the defensive side of the ball? Obviously, the Seahawks did lose Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill last offseason, and Frank Clark, while he is having a career year, he is a free agent as well. So the Seahawks do need some help on the edge. Polite had a really good year at Florida, and this is really his only really good year, so you only get 1 year of tape to really show for him, which obviously makes this pick pretty risky, but I think the reward could be very nice for Seattle. 24th pick, the Oakland Raiders select Marquise Hollywood Brown, wide receiver, Oklahoma. Obviously, Hollywood Brown did not have a good showing against Alabama in the college football playoff. I don't think he caught a single pass, and he did drop a few, but I don't think his stock should drop too much. I think he's still a late first, early second round talent. Marquise Brown is your prototypical deep threat. He's really fast. He spaces the field for the other receivers, and he can make a lot of big plays, which I think would really help out the Raiders. Obviously, their receiving core isn't the youngest, and it's certainly not the best. I think their best receiver, who would it be? Jordy Nelson? Probably not. Jordy Nelson isn't really good anymore. But the Raiders need a receiver for Derek Carr. They really don't have any outside of Jared Cook, who's an aging tight end. And I think Hollywood Brown would be a nice pick for Oakland. 25th pick, the Baltimore Ravens select A.J. Brown, wide receiver, Ole Miss. So 2 straight receivers off the board with the last name Brown. A.J. Brown, he's a low risk, I'm not going to say low reward player, but I don't think he has as low of a floor as someone like a DK Metcalf. I don't think he has the upside of someone like a DK Metcalf. And I think that's what the Ravens need for Lamar Jackson. Don't take a risk. Just play it safe. You know you're getting a really good receiver in A.J. Brown. Good route runner, good hands, gives you pretty much everything you need for a number 1 target. And obviously Lamar Jackson does need that, as he's not the most profound passer yet. And I think getting a receiver like A.J. Brown, who doesn't drop a lot of passes, he runs his routes very efficiently. I think he fits what Baltimore is looking for and could be very good for their offense. 26th pick, the Houston Texans select Byron Murphy, cornerback, Washington. Texans fans are screaming at me right now. Obviously, they need an offensive line really bad. Deshaun Watson got sacked way too much. And while it makes sense to go with an offensive lineman here, maybe a Dalton Risner out of Kansas State, I think Byron Murphy is too good to pass up. Murphy is a top 15 talent in this draft class, in my opinion. He's a very smart football player. He can play man. He can play zone. He's a very hard worker. He has an extremely good work ethic. And while the Texans secondary was really good this year, Kareem Jackson, Jonathan Joseph, they both had solid years. And then at the safety spots, the Honey Badger was good. Andre Howe returning from chemotherapy, he was pretty good. But Kareem Jackson and Jonathan Joseph aren't getting any younger. So I think this pick makes a lot of sense for Houston. I think Byron Murphy could get some early playing time right away. And if they pick Murphy now, they're going to need to use pretty much the rest of their draft and free agency focusing on that offensive line. The New England Patriots select Will Grier, quarterback, West Virginia. So the Patriots draft Tom Brady's potential replacement in Will Grier. While they could go after a player that helps them win now, potentially makes it more likely they win the Super Bowl. That's nice and all, but who's going to be your quarterback once Tom Brady retires? Next year, he's going to be in his age 41 season, or 42. I don't know if he's 40 or 41 right now. All we know is he is extremely old, and he's not going to be in the NFL in 5 years, I don't think. I think he definitely took a step down this year. While Tom Brady still had a good year, he was nowhere near the MVP form that he was last year. And I'm not a big Will Grier fan. He's sort of my Baker Mayfield from last year, where they were mainly good because they played in the Big 12. They're older for an NFL draft prospect. They're cocky, and I don't know about him. He does have pretty good accuracy. He has a solid arm, but I'm just not huge on Will Grier, and I think if the Patriots do get him, then that'll be a bad pick. With the 28th pick, the Oakland Raiders select Noah Fant, tight end, Iowa. While Jared Cook was really good this year for the Raiders, he's not getting any younger, and it may be time to prepare for life past Jared Cook, even though he's only been there like 2 years. I'm making it sound like he's been there for 10, but that's besides the point. I am extremely high on Noah Fant. He might have not even been the best tight end on his college team last year, as TJ Hawkinson won the John Mackey Award, but Noah Fant is my number 1 tight end in this draft class by a decent margin. I think he's a top 15 talent. And I'm not huge on picking a tight end that high. I was not huge on the Eric Ebron pick at the time. Obviously, that didn't work out for us, and he's been phenomenal this year for the Colts, but was never good with Detroit. But that's besides the point. I think Noah Fant is a very good player. He is extremely athletic. He had a 42.5-inch vertical. He's not a great blocker, but he's a very good receiver, and he's very athletic, which is 2 things that you really look for in a tight end. Obviously, you wish he's a good blocker, but He can catch the football, he can make plays with the football, and he's a freak athlete, so that sounds pretty good to me. The 29th pick, the Los Angeles Chargers select Raekwon Davis, defensive tackle, Alabama. The Chargers desperately need a defensive tackle, as Corey Liuget, he's a meh player at best, and after him, who do they have? Like Darius Philon? It's not pretty. That's a huge position of need. Raekwon Davis has done the dirty work this year at Alabama. Obviously, Quinnen Williams has been the big name on their defensive line, and Williams has truly been spectacular, but Raekwon Davis is very good too, and without Davis, Quinnen Williams would not have had the year that he had. I think Williams can have a similar role in the NFL. He can create spacing and less blockers focusing on Melvin Ingram and Joey Bosa, and it'll make it easier for the two of them to do what they do best, which is, of course, getting to the quarterback. I think this is a good fit for Raekwon Davis, and I think this is a good pick for the Chargers, so win-win for both sides. With the 30th pick, the Kansas City Chiefs select Devin Bush, linebacker, Michigan. Obviously, Kansas City has a Super Bowl talent offense, but their defense is definitely not Super Bowl caliber, and may be the main reason why that they don't win it this year. I think linebacker is their biggest need, as Derrick Johnson is not on the team anymore, I don't think. And who the heck is their middle linebacker? Do they still have Ramik Wilson? I don't know. They need a lot of help at middle linebacker, and the best one on the board is Devin White. White is a somewhat raw player. He's a very good player in run defense, but he needs to work on his pass rushing skills and his pass coverage skills, but he's a hard worker. He gives 100% effort, 100% of the time. He's what you look for in a leader, and I think that could be very useful for the Chiefs' defense. With the 31st pick, the Los Angeles Rams select Dalton Risner, offensive lineman, Kansas State. Obviously, I think the Rams do need secondary help, mainly cornerback help, and I think they could go with a cornerback with this pick, but I think they could also use some offensive line, as they have a good offensive line, but Andrew Whitworth, he's not getting any younger, and they have some other meh players on that offensive line, like Roger Saffold, Rob Havenstein. Like, those guys are solid, but they're not outstanding. Dalton Risner is extremely versatile. He can play tackle, he can play guard, he can play center, he can play wherever you need him to play on the offensive line. And while I think this could be a good pick for Houston, obviously I had been going with Murphy, and I think Dalton Risner is for sure a first-round talent, and this is a nice pick for Los Angeles. With the 32nd pick, the Green Bay Packers select Dexter Lawrence, defensive tackle, Clemson. This is a very strange fit, in my opinion. The Packers run a 3-4, and they have Kenny Clark, who's a really good defensive tackle, but are they willing to pay him defensive tackle, like, elite money? And I think while they should, I'm not sold that they will. Dexter Lawrence is very athletic, but he's extremely raw, he's extremely inconsistent, and obviously he had the drug test, which was found positive. He did not play against Notre Dame in the college football playoff semifinal. He's not playing on Monday in the championship against Alabama. And I think this is a risky go big or go home pick, which is, I think, what the Packers need. I really like Dexter Lawrence's upside, and I think this could be a really good pick or a really bad pick. So hope you guys enjoyed the video and the new series. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. This will be a weekly series. I'll be doing this every Saturday. Don't know what next Saturday's theme is gonna be. Maybe an NBA mock, maybe an NFL mock big board, maybe playoff predictions, even though I probably should have done that this week. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed. I'm out. Peace.